At our annual family party, my dad looked me straight in the eyes in front of 50 guests and said, "You're a shame to this family." But what I did next didn't just shock everyone, it destroyed their perfect little world forever. I'm Emma, and this is the story of how one humiliating moment at a luxury family gathering became the catalyst for the most devastating revenge you've ever heard. By the end of this, my family went from living in $1 million mansion to losing absolutely everything. And the twist? They had no idea I was the one pulling all the strings. *Hit subscribe if you love luxury revenge stories, and comment where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to see how this masterpiece of revenge unfolds. Let me paint you a picture of the Morrison family dynasty. We lived in Westchester County, New York, in a sprawling estate that looked like it belonged in a movie. 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a wine cellar worth more than most people's houses, and manicured gardens that required a team of landscapers to maintain. My father, Richard Morrison, was the CEO of Morrison Luxury Developments, a real estate empire built on high-end hotels and exclusive residential properties. He wore $1,000 suits like they were everyday clothes and drove a different luxury car for each day of the week. My mother, Catherine, was the perfect trophy wife. Former Miss New York, now the queen of charity galas and country club gossip. She spent more on a single handbag than most families spend on groceries in a year. Then there was my golden brother, James. Harvard MBA, father's heir apparent, married to a senator's daughter. He lived in a penthouse in Manhattan that overlooked Central Park, drove a Lamborghini, and had never worked a real day in his life. And then there was me. Emma Morrison, the family disappointment. You see, while my family built their empire on luxury and status, I chose a different path. I became a social worker, helping underprivileged kids in the Bronx. I lived in a modest apartment in Queens, drove a 10-year-old Honda, and wore clothes from Target instead of designer boutiques. To my family, I was an embarrassment. A stain on their perfect reputation. But they had no idea that their disappointing daughter had been secretly documenting every dirty secret, every illegal business deal, every corrupt transaction that built their precious empire. And I was about to use all of it every year. My parents threw what they called the Morrison Annual Charity Gala, though it was really just an excuse for wealthy people to show off their money while pretending to care about poor children. The irony wasn't lost on me. This particular October evening, their Westchester estate was transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers hung from silk-draped trees in the garden. A full orchestra played on a stage overlooking the pool. Ice sculptures depicted the Morrison family crest. The champagne flowed like water, and each bottle cost more than my monthly rent. The guest list read like a who's who of New York's elite. Politicians, celebrities, Fortune 500 CEOs, and old money families whose names appeared on museum wings and hospital buildings. I arrived in my only decent dress, a simple black number I'd bought on sale 3 years ago. Next to the other women in their designer gowns and million-dollar jewelry, I looked like the help. Emma. My mother's voice cut through the classical music like nails on a chalkboard. She glided over in a stunning red Valentino gown, dripping in diamonds. Darling, you made it. Her smile was plastic, her hug cold and calculated. She was performing for the cameras, not showing genuine affection. Hi, Mom. The party looks beautiful. Thank you, sweetheart. Now, please try not to mention your work to anyone important tonight. You know how people talk. Before I could respond, she'd already moved on to greet a group of potential donors, leaving me standing alone by the champagne fountain. That's when I saw him. Senator William Hartford, shaking hands with my father by the pool. The same Senator Hartford whose environmental protection bills had been mysteriously defeated in committee for the past 3 years. The same senator whose votes had allowed my father's company to build luxury resorts on protected wetlands. I pulled out my phone and discreetly started recording. "Richard, my friend," Senator Hartford said, raising his glass. Here's to another successful year of keeping those environmental nuts off our backs. My father laughed, clinking glasses. Bill, you have no idea how much those votes have been worth to me. The Hamptons project alone netted us $40 million this quarter. Well, our arrangement has been mutually beneficial, the senator replied. Speaking of which, Catherine mentioned something about a contribution to my re-election campaign? Already taken care of. $500,000, as usual. Untraceable, of course. Asterisk bingo. Political bribery, environmental fraud, and tax evasion all in one conversation. Asterisk I was so focused on recording that I didn't notice my brother James approaching until it was too late. What are you doing, Emma? His voice was suspicious, his eyes narrow. Just taking some photos of the party. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Delete whatever you just recorded. Now. I don't know what you're talking about. Emma. My father's voice boomed across the garden. Come here. Now. The entire party seemed to pause. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The orchestra continued playing, but it felt like background music to a horror movie. I walked over to where my father stood, Senator Hartford beside him, both men looking at me with barely concealed disgust. Senator Hartford, my father said, his voice dripping with false pleasantry, I'd like you to meet my daughter, Emma. The social worker. He said social worker like it was a disease. Senator Hartford looked me up and down dismissively. Ah yes, the bleeding heart. Richard, you've mentioned her before. Unfortunately, my father replied. Then he turned to me, his eyes cold as ice. Emma, the senator was just telling me about his recent visit to one of your facilities in the Bronx. Apparently, it's quite the eye-opener to see how the other half lives. The senator chuckled. Honestly, Richard, I don't know how she stands it. All those dirty, ungrateful children. If it were up to me, we'd cut funding to those programs entirely. Let them pull themselves up by their bootstraps. I felt my blood pressure rising. Those children aren't dirty or ungrateful, Senator. They're victims of a system that, Emma. My father's voice was sharp, warning. That's enough. But I couldn't stop. 3 glasses of champagne and years of suppressed anger were bubbling to the surface. Senator, with all due respect, maybe if politicians like you stopped taking bribes from developers and actually protected the communities these children live in. The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. My father's hand connected with my cheek with a sound that echoed across the suddenly silent garden. How dare you, he hissed, his face red with rage. How dare you embarrass this family in front of our guests? I touched my cheek, feeling the sting, aware that 50 of New York's most powerful people were staring at us. Richard, my mother approached quickly, trying to do damage control. Perhaps we should, no, Catherine. She needs to hear this. My father's voice rose so everyone could hear. Emma, you are a shame to this family. You're a disappointment, an embarrassment, and a constant reminder of our failures as parents. The words hit harder than the slap. You live in squalor, work with criminals and degenerates, and now you have the audacity to insult our guests in our own home. His voice was getting louder, more vicious. I should have cut you off years ago. You're pathetic, worthless, and you will never amount to anything. The garden was dead silent except for the sound of my heart breaking. But then something changed inside me. The hurt transformed into something else. Something cold and calculating and dangerous. I looked around at all the faces staring at me. Politicians, CEOs, socialites, all of them looking at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. I smiled. You know what, Dad? You're absolutely right. My voice was calm, steady, almost cheerful. I am ashamed to this family. Because I have something you'll never have. And what's that? He sneered. Integrity. I pulled out my phone, the recording still running. And evidence. The look of confusion on his face was worth every second of humiliation. I raised my voice so everyone could hear. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending the Morrison Annual Charity Gala. I hope you've enjoyed the champagne, the caviar, and the corruption. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Did you know that your host, my dear father, has been bribing Senator Hartford for 3 years to defeat environmental protection bills? Or that Morrison Luxury Developments has been using shell companies to avoid paying taxes on over $60 million in profits? Emma, stop this immediately, my mother hissed. But I was just getting started. Oh, it gets better. The charity you're all donating to tonight? The Morrison Foundation for Underprivileged Children? It's a sham. Less than 5% of donations actually reach children. The rest goes directly into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I could see my father's face going from red to white to green. And James, I turned to my brother, who was trying to slip away through the crowd. Did everyone know that James here has been embezzling money from the employee pension fund to pay for his cocaine habit? You psychotic bitch. James lunged toward me, but 2 security guards held him back. I backed toward the garden exit, still addressing the crowd. Oh, and one more thing. The FBI raided the Morrison Luxury Developments offices this morning. Funny thing about wearing a wire to family parties, law enforcement gets really excited about evidence of federal crimes. That's when all hell broke loose. Let me back up and tell you how I really spent the 6 months leading up to that party. Remember how I said I was just a social worker? Well, that was only half true. I was also a federal informant. It started a year ago when one of the kids I worked with, a brilliant 15-year-old named Marcus, came to me with a problem. His single mother was being evicted from their apartment. The building had been sold to a development company that wanted to tear it down and build luxury condos. The development company? Morrison Luxury Developments. I tried to help through normal channels. I called my father, explained the situation, asked if there was anything he could do. He laughed and told me that's just business. So I dug deeper. What I found made my stomach turn. My father's company had been systematically targeting low-income housing in minority neighborhoods, using legal loopholes and political connections to force out residents and build expensive developments that the original communities could never afford. But that was just the beginning. I found evidence of bribery, tax evasion, money laundering, and fraud stretching back over a decade. The Morrison family fortune was built on the suffering of exactly the people I'd dedicated my life to helping. That's when I contacted the FBI. Agent Sarah Martinez was a financial crime specialist who'd been investigating corruption in New York's real estate industry for years. When I showed her what I'd found, her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Emma, she said during our first meeting, this is exactly what we need to bring down the entire network. But we need more evidence. Recordings, documents, financial records. How am I supposed to get that? She smiled. You're going to wear a wire to every family gathering for the next 6 months. And that's exactly what I did. Sunday dinners, birthday parties, business meetings I was invited to as the harmless daughter, I recorded everything. I captured my father discussing bribes with politicians. I recorded my mother talking about fake charity donations with her socialite friends. I documented James's cocaine purchases and his theft from employee accounts. By the time of the annual gala, I had enough evidence to destroy them all. But wearing that wire wasn't just about gathering evidence. It was about psychological warfare. You see, I'd been playing the role of the disappointed, submissive daughter for so long that they'd forgotten I had a brain. They talked freely around me because they thought I was too weak, too naive, too pathetic to be a threat. They were about to learn how wrong they were. While I was being humiliated at the garden party, FBI agents were executing search warrants at Morrison Luxury Developments, my parents' house, James's penthouse, and even the country club where they kept their records. The timing was perfect. All the key players were at the party, which meant their properties were undefended. But here's the part that made my revenge truly sweet. I made sure the raids were scheduled for exactly the moment I planned to reveal everything at the party. As I walked away from the gala, leaving my family and their guests in chaos, my phone buzzed with updates from Agent Martinez. Raid complete. Seized over 10,000 documents, 47 computers, and found the offshore accounts. Your family is done. I smiled, getting into my Honda and driving away from the estate for the last time. Behind me, I could hear sirens approaching. The FBI was coming to arrest my father and brother at their own party, in front of all their wealthy friends. The irony was delicious, but my revenge was far from over. The public humiliation was just the beginning. By the next morning, the Morrison family scandal was front-page news across the country. Luxury developer dynasty crumbles and FBI raid, senator implicated in bribery scandal, charity fraud rocks high society. I sat in my modest Queens apartment, sipping coffee and watching the news coverage with satisfaction. My phone had been ringing all morning, reporters wanting interviews, former family friends wanting explanations, and lawyers wanting to know if I needed protection. I ignored them all. The best part was watching my family's carefully constructed image crumble in real time. The news showed footage of my father being led away in handcuffs, still wearing his $1,000 tuxedo from the party. My mother was photographed crying outside the courthouse, her perfect makeup running down her cheeks. James had barricaded himself in his penthouse, but the FBI eventually broke down the door. The footage of him being arrested in his silk pajamas, cocaine residue still on his coffee table, went viral within hours. But the real satisfaction came from seeing their assets frozen. The mansion, the cars, the boats, the artwork, everything seized by federal marshals. My family went from millionaires to homeless in less than 24 hours. Senator Hartford resigned in disgrace. 3 other politicians were implicated in the bribery scheme. My family's dirty money was going to undo all the damage they'd caused. Now that's what I call poetic justice. The trials took almost 2 years, but they were worth the wait. I testified against my family in open court, providing evidence that sent my father to prison for 15 years on charges including bribery, fraud, tax evasion, and racketeering. James got 12 years for embezzlement and drug trafficking. Apparently, his cocaine habit had led him to start dealing to other wealthy addicts. My mother, surprisingly, got the harshest sentence. 20 years for running the fake charity and money laundering operations. The judge was particularly harsh because she'd been stealing from children's organizations. Senator Hartford got 8 years and lost his pension. The other politicians involved got various sentences ranging from 3 to 10 years. During my testimony, I looked directly at my father in his orange jumpsuit and said, "You called me a shame to the family, Dad. But look around. I'm the only Morrison not wearing prison clothes." The courtroom was packed with reporters, and that quote made headlines around the world. But here's what the media didn't know. I hadn't just destroyed my family's criminal empire. I'd also inherited it. Sort of, while my family was busy being humiliated and arrested, I'd been working with the FBI's financial recovery team to trace all of their hidden assets. It turns out that when you help the federal government recover hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen money, they're very generous with whistleblower rewards. I received a check for $27 million. $27 million that I could use however I wanted. But instead of buying mansions and luxury cars like my family would have, I did something they never could have imagined. I started a legitimate charity. The Emma Morrison Foundation for Social Justice focused on 3 main areas: legal aid for low-income families being displaced by gentrification, environmental protection in urban communities, and educational programs for at-risk youth. Within a year, we'd helped over 3,000 families stay in their homes, funded the cleanup of 6 polluted neighborhoods, and provided college scholarships to 200 students who never would have had the opportunity otherwise. I also bought the building where Marcus and his mother had been living, the same building my father's company had tried to tear down. I renovated it into affordable housing and made sure the families who'd been displaced could move back at below-market rents. My family had spent decades destroying communities. I was going to spend the rest of my life rebuilding them, but the most satisfying part wasn't the charity work or the money or even seeing my family in prison. It was the respect. The same people who used to look at me with pity or disgust now looked at me with admiration. I was invited to speak at conferences, serve on boards, and advise politicians on social justice issues. I'd gone from being the family shame to being one of the most respected advocates in New York. And I'd done it by staying true to my values while my family lost everything by abandoning theirs. 3 years after the trials, I decided to visit my father in prison. He'd aged dramatically. His hair was completely gray, his skin pale and sallow. The expensive suits had been replaced by an orange jumpsuit, and his hands shook when he reached for the phone on his side of the bulletproof glass. "Emma," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You came." I did. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between us. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "For what I said at the party." "For everything." I studied his face, looking for signs of genuine remorse or just manipulation. "Are you sorry you said it, or are you sorry you got caught?" He flinched. "I deserved that." "Dad, do you understand what you did? Not just the crimes, but the damage? The families you destroyed, the communities you poisoned, the children you stole from?" He nodded, tears starting to form in his eyes. "I know. I think about it every day." "Good. Because those people didn't have the luxury of forgetting." I stood to leave, but he called out to me. "Emma, wait. The foundation. I read about it in the newspaper. I'm proud of you." I stopped, my hand on the phone. "You know what, Dad? I don't need your pride anymore. I have something better." "What's that?" "I have my own." I hung up the phone and walked away, leaving him behind the glass where he belonged. Bridget, remember how I said I'd been working as a social worker in the Bronx? Well, that was true. But what I didn't mention was why I'd chosen that particular job in that particular neighborhood. It wasn't random. 5 years before all of this happened, I'd been working at a different organization, a legal aid clinic in Manhattan. One of my cases involved a family fighting eviction from their apartment building. The building was owned by Morrison Luxury Developments. During the legal proceedings, I discovered something that changed everything. The family fighting eviction, a single mother named Maria Santos and her teenage son Diego, weren't just random tenants. Maria Santos was my biological mother. I'd been adopted as a baby. My adoptive parents, Richard and Catherine Morrison, had always told me my birth parents were dead. They'd lied. My real mother had been trying to keep her apartment so she could stay close to the only connection she had left to me, the adoption agency where she'd last seen me. My father's company was trying to evict my biological mother. The same man who'd called me a shame to the family was actively destroying the life of the woman who'd given birth to me. When I realized the truth, I had a choice. I could have confronted my adoptive family directly, demanded they stop the eviction, revealed the connection. Instead, I chose a longer, more devastating path. I got a job working with at-risk youth in Maria's neighborhood. I became her son Diego's mentor. I helped Maria fight the eviction through legal channels while secretly gathering evidence against the Morrison family empire. For 2 years, I lived a double life. Loving daughter by day, federal informant by night. Family dinners with the people who'd lied to me about my origins, followed by secret meetings with FBI agents to plan their downfall. And Maria? She never knew who I really was. To her, I was just Emma, the nice social worker who helped her son with college applications and fought to save their home. But Diego figured it out. Smart kid. He noticed that I looked like his mother, asked questions about my background, put together pieces I thought I'd hidden. The night before the FBI raid, he confronted me in the community center where we held tutoring sessions. "You're her daughter, aren't you?" he said quietly. "You're my sister." I could have denied it. Should have denied it. But looking into his eyes that looked so much like mine, I couldn't lie anymore. "Yes," I whispered. "I am." "And the family that adopted you, they're the ones trying to kick us out?" "Not anymore." I told him everything. The investigation, the wire, the plan to destroy the Morrison family empire at their own party. Diego listened in silence, then said something that still gives me chills. "Good. Make them pay for what they did to us. Make them pay for what they stole." He wasn't just talking about the apartment. He was my baby Elena? I go by Emma now. But yes. I'm your daughter. What happened next was the most emotional moment of my life. This woman who'd been fighting to stay in her apartment so she could be close to my memory, who'd never stopped hoping I'd find her someday, who'd watched me mentor her son without knowing I was her daughter, she collapsed into my arms crying. "I knew," she sobbed. "I knew there was something about you. The way you looked at Diego, the way you cared about our family. I felt it, but I didn't dare hope." We held each other in that community center, surrounded by the neighborhood my biological mother had fought to stay in, the neighborhood my adoptive father had tried to destroy. Diego joined us, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of a real family. Not one built on money and status and corruption, but one built on love and resilience and hope. "So," Diego said, grinning through his tears, "does this mean I can put down that I'm related to a millionaire on my college applications?" I laughed, wiping my eyes. "Only if you want to explain that your sister destroyed her adoptive family's criminal empire to save your mother's apartment." "Even better," he said. "That's definitely getting me into Harvard." And you know what? It did. Diego graduated valedictorian and got a full scholarship to Harvard Law School. He wants to be a civil rights attorney. I guess justice runs in the family. Today, 5 years after that humiliating night at the Morrison Gala, I'm not just Emma Morrison, the social worker from Queens. I'm Emma Santos Morrison, CEO of the Santos Morrison Foundation for Social Justice, one of the largest advocacy organizations in the country. Maria lives in a beautiful apartment in the same neighborhood where I found her, the neighborhood that my father tried to destroy. The building is now part of an affordable housing cooperative that I helped establish. Diego is in his second year at Harvard Law, interning with the same FBI financial crimes unit that helped bring down the Morrison family. My adoptive family? My father will be eligible for parole when he's 78. James gets out in 6 years but will never work in finance again. My mother is serving her time in a minimum security facility, and rumor has it she's teaching literacy classes to other inmates. I don't hate them anymore. Hate takes too much energy, and I have more important things to do. But I do think about them sometimes, especially when I'm in my office overlooking the Bronx neighborhood where this all began. I think about how they thought money and status were the only things that mattered. How they believed that hurting people was just the cost of doing business. They were wrong about everything, but they were especially wrong about me. I wasn't ashamed to the family. I was the only one with a conscience. And in the end, that made all the difference. You see, real power doesn't come from how much money you have or how many people you can buy. Real power comes from knowing who you are, standing up for what's right, and never letting anyone make you feel small. My adoptive father called me worthless in front of 50 people. Now those same people work for organizations I fund, support causes I champion, and respect the name Santos Morrison as a symbol of justice. ***. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's becoming everything they could never be. ***. And if you're facing people who make you feel worthless, who call you names, who try to make you small, remember this story. Remember that your worth isn't determined by what others think of you. ***. It's determined by what you think of yourself, and what you're willing to fight for. But here's the final twist that nobody saw coming, not even me. Last month, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, postmarked from the federal prison where my father. Your father wasn't just running his own operation, he was part of a network. A network of wealthy families across the country who've been doing exactly what he was doing for decades. What are you saying? I'm saying your testimony didn't just take down your family. It exposed a conspiracy that goes all the way to Washington. And now the other families involved know you're the one who brought it all down. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. ***. I thought my story was over. I thought justice had been served. ***. But it turns out, this was just the beginning. The Morrison family was one tentacle of an octopus I'd never imagined, and now the whole creature was awake, angry, and looking for revenge against me.